The burden of Judah. Introduction. The question beneath leadership. When most people think about leadership, they think about authority. They think about crowns, titles, positions, influence, power. The image that often comes to mind is someone standing above others, someone directing, someone ruling, someone exercising authority. Yet Scripture consistently presents a very different picture. The kingdom of the Most High does not begin with authority. It begins with responsibility. It begins with stewardship. It begins with service. It begins with burden. This is one of the reasons Judah is so often misunderstood. When people hear the name Judah, they immediately think about kings. They think about David. They think about the throne. They think about the scepter. They think about rulership. They think about authority. But Scripture repeatedly points us somewhere deeper. Before Judah carried authority, Judah carried responsibility. Before Judah received a crown, Judah received a burden. Before Judah ruled, Judah preserved. That distinction matters, because the story of Judah is not primarily a story about power. It is a story about stewardship. It is not primarily a story about privilege. It is a story about responsibility. It is not primarily a story about who gets to sit on the throne. It is a story about who is willing to carry the weight when carrying the weight becomes difficult. And perhaps that is where modern people struggle to understand kingdom leadership. We live in a world that celebrates visibility. The kingdom celebrates faithfulness. The world rewards influence. The kingdom rewards stewardship. The world teaches people to pursue position. The kingdom teaches people to pursue responsibility. In Babylon, people often seek authority because of what authority can provide. In the kingdom, authority exists because responsibility must be carried. That is why Scripture consistently presents leadership as service rather than status. The shepherd exists for the flock. The watchman exists for the city. The steward exists for the household. The ruler exists for the people. The burden always belongs to the one entrusted with preservation. This pattern appears throughout Scripture. When Noah was called, he received a burden before he received vindication. When Abraham was called, he received a burden before he received fulfillment. When Moses was called, he received a burden before he received victory. When David was called, he received a burden long before he received a crown. The kingdom pattern never changes. The burden comes first, the crown comes later. And sometimes the burden lasts far longer than anyone expected. This principle becomes especially important when we begin examining Judah, because many people see the throne but miss the responsibility. They see the kings but miss the preservation. They see the authority but miss the burden. Yet the burden is the entire story. Why was Judah called first? Why was Judah entrusted with stewardship? Why was Judah repeatedly placed in positions where responsibility outweighed comfort? Why did the burden seem heavier upon Judah than upon others? Those questions lead us to a deeper reality hidden beneath Israel's history. The story of Judah is not ultimately about rulership. It is about preservation. Preservation of truth. Preservation of covenant. Preservation of order. Preservation of inheritance. Preservation of something so important that generation after generation would be required to carry it forward. And whenever something valuable must be preserved, opposition eventually appears. Because preservation is never passive. Preservation requires vigilance. Preservation requires sacrifice. Preservation requires endurance. Preservation requires someone willing to carry the weight when others would rather put it down. This was the question hidden inside Israel's history. And it remains the question hidden inside our lives today. Who will carry what has been entrusted to them? Who will preserve what is worth preserving? Who will remain faithful when compromise becomes easier than obedience? Who will continue carrying the burden when everyone else is looking for a crown? To understand why Judah was entrusted with stewardship, we first have to understand a kingdom principle that appears throughout Scripture. A principle that explains not only Judah's story, but the story of nearly every servant the Most High has ever called. In the kingdom of the Most High, the burden comes before the crown. Chapter 1. The weight before the crown. One of the most revealing moments in Israel's history occurs immediately after the death of Joshua. Joshua had led Israel through conquest. Joshua had led Israel through transition. Joshua had led Israel into the land promised to their fathers. For an entire generation, Joshua had been the visible leader standing before the people. And then he was gone. Suddenly, Israel found itself standing in a place that every nation eventually reaches. A place of uncertainty. A place of transition. A place where responsibility can no longer be deferred to someone else. The nation stood at a crossroads. The great leader who had guided them into the land was gone. The people now faced a question. Not a question about geography. Not a question about military strategy. Not a question about resources. A question about responsibility. The children of Israel came before the Most High and asked, "Who shall go up for us against the Canaanites first, to fight against them?" The answer was simple. Judah shall go up. At first glance, many readers interpret this as a declaration of superiority. They assume the Most High was announcing that Judah was somehow better than the other tribes. That interpretation misses the deeper lesson. The question was not, who deserves honor? The question was, who will carry responsibility? Someone had to go first. Someone had to bear the uncertainty. Someone had to move before everyone else knew the outcome. Someone had to accept the risk. Someone had to carry the burden. The Most High did not ask for a volunteer. He assigned a steward. Judah was called first, not because Judah was promised comfort, not because Judah was promised recognition, not because Judah was promised privilege. Judah was called because stewardship always moves first. This principle appears repeatedly throughout Scripture. The shepherd moves before the flock. He enters the danger first. He bears the responsibility first. He accepts the risk first. The watchman stays awake while others sleep. While the city rests, the watchman remains alert. The burden belongs to him because the responsibility belongs to him. The servant carries responsibilities that others never see. The steward accepts obligations that others may never understand. The protector often sacrifices long before anyone recognizes the danger that was avoided. This is one of the reasons kingdom leadership is so different from Babylonian leadership. Babylon sees leadership as a position. The kingdom sees leadership as a burden. Babylon seeks authority first. The kingdom assigns responsibility first. Babylon asks, "What can I gain?" The kingdom asks, "What has been entrusted to me?" Babylon measures success by what is acquired. The kingdom measures success by what is preserved. Babylon pursues status. The kingdom pursues faithfulness. That difference changes everything. Modern culture teaches people to pursue position. Scripture teaches people to pursue faithfulness. Modern culture celebrates visibility. Scripture emphasizes responsibility. Modern culture encourages people to be seen. Scripture encourages people to be trustworthy. Modern culture seeks crowns. The kingdom prepares people through burdens. This is why so many people misunderstand stewardship. They see the visible reward. They do not see the invisible weight. They see the throne. They do not see the responsibility attached to it. They see the authority. They do not see the accountability. They see the recognition. They do not see the sacrifice. Judah's story begins here, not with rulership, not with privilege, not with power, with stewardship. Before Judah became associated with kings, Judah became associated with responsibility. Before Judah carried a scepter, Judah carried a burden. Before Judah received authority, Judah accepted accountability. That order matters, because in the kingdom, authority is never given merely to elevate a person. Authority is given because something needs to be preserved, something needs to be protected, something needs to be carried. The burden came first, the crown came later, and that pattern has never changed. We see it in Abraham. We see it in Moses. We see it in David. We see it throughout the prophets. And we see it in every steward the Most High calls. The burden comes first. The crown comes later. Yet this raises an important question. If Judah was entrusted with stewardship, what exactly was Judah responsible for preserving? What made this burden so important? And why would the Most High entrust such responsibility to a single tribe? To answer that question, we must first understand why the scepter was necessary in the first place. Chapter 2. Why the scepter was necessary. When people hear the word scepter, they often imagine domination, a ruler, a throne, a king issuing commands, someone exercising power over others. That understanding is common in Babylon. It is far less common in the kingdom of the Most High. One of the great misunderstandings of Scripture is assuming that kingdom authority functions the same way worldly authority functions. It does not. Babylon establishes authority for the benefit of the ruler. The kingdom establishes authority for the protection of the people. Babylon asks, "How can power serve me?" The kingdom asks, "How can responsibility serve others?" This distinction sits at the heart of understanding Judah. Because if we misunderstand the purpose of the scepter, we will misunderstand the burden attached to it. The scepter was never intended to be a symbol of privilege. It was intended to be a symbol of stewardship. To understand why, we have to step back and ask a larger question. How does a civilization survive? Not merely for a year, not merely for a generation, but for centuries. How do truth, justice, inheritance, and order survive the passage of time? How does one generation successfully hand something valuable to the next? Scripture repeatedly demonstrates that these things do not preserve themselves. Truth must be taught. Justice must be maintained. Families must be protected. Inheritance must be safeguarded. Order must be preserved. Without stewardship, all of these things slowly deteriorate, not overnight, not dramatically. Gradually, one neglected generation becomes two. One compromise becomes many. One forgotten principle becomes an abandoned culture. This is why the kingdom requires stewards, because what is valuable must be preserved. And this is one reason Israel's structure was so remarkable. The Most High divided responsibilities. Different burdens were entrusted to different people. Different stewardships existed for different purposes. Israel operated through two complementary responsibilities. Levi preserved instruction. Judah preserved order. Levi taught. Judah protected. Levi maintained covenant understanding. Judah maintained covenant administration. Levi guarded truth. Judah guarded the environment in which truth could survive. Neither responsibility was sufficient by itself. Instruction without protection becomes vulnerable. Protection without instruction becomes corruption. Truth without order becomes fragile. Order without truth becomes tyranny. The kingdom required both. This is why Scripture repeatedly emphasizes balance. Authority must remain accountable. Power must remain submitted to truth. Government must remain submitted to heaven. The kingdom of the Most High never permits authority to become its own source of legitimacy. The ruler does not stand above truth. The ruler stands beneath it. The steward does not create the standard. The steward preserves the standard. This is one of the reasons righteous government is so rare throughout history. Most governments eventually begin serving themselves. Most rulers eventually begin protecting their own interests. Most systems eventually become more concerned with preservation of power than preservation of truth. Babylon repeatedly demonstrates this pattern. The kingdom repeatedly opposes it. Because the kingdom definition of leadership is fundamentally different. The burden entrusted to Judah was never ownership. The burden entrusted to Judah was stewardship. Judah did not possess the kingdom. Judah was responsible for preserving it. That responsibility included maintaining order, protecting inheritance, defending justice, safeguarding continuity, ensuring that what had been entrusted by one generation successfully reached the next. This is why the scepter was necessary. Not because people needed someone to dominate them, because people needed someone willing to carry responsibility. The scepter represented accountability. The scepter represented stewardship. The scepter represented the burden of preserving order beneath the authority of heaven. And that burden was not light, because stewardship always attracts opposition. Whenever something valuable is being preserved, something eventually attempts to corrupt it. Whenever truth is maintained, deception seeks entry. Whenever covenant order is established, another order seeks to replace it. Whenever inheritance is protected, something seeks to interrupt it. The steward quickly discovers that preservation is never passive. Preservation requires vigilance. Preservation requires sacrifice. Preservation requires endurance. And over time, the burden becomes heavier. Not because the steward is weak, but because what is being preserved is valuable. Which leads us to an even deeper reality. The burden of Judah was heavy for another reason. Judah was preserving more than most people realized. Judah carried more than responsibility. Judah carried a promise. Chapter 3. The promise Judah carried. As Jacob approached the end of his life, he gathered his sons around him and began speaking words that would reach far beyond his own generation. These were not merely the reflections of an aging father. These were declarations concerning the future. Declarations concerning inheritance. Declarations concerning responsibility. Declarations concerning what each son and each tribe would carry into history. When Jacob came to Judah, he spoke words that would echo through generations. The scepter shall not depart from Judah. For many readers, the focus immediately becomes the scepter, the authority, the governance, the leadership, the rulership. And certainly those things are present. Yet hidden within the blessing is something even greater. A promise, because the statement itself reaches beyond the immediate moment. It reaches beyond Judah himself, beyond his sons, beyond his grandchildren, beyond the generations that would follow. The blessing points toward a future that had not yet arrived, and that future becomes part of Judah's burden. This is one of the most important things to understand about stewardship. Stewardship is rarely about the present alone. True stewardship always extends into the future. The steward protects things he may never personally enjoy. The steward preserves things he may never personally benefit from. The steward sacrifices for outcomes he may never personally witness. This is what separates stewardship from ownership. Ownership asks, "What do I get?" Stewardship asks, "What must I preserve?" Judah inherited responsibility, but Judah also inherited expectation. Something was being carried forward. Something was being preserved. Something connected to the future. At this stage of the story, the full picture had not yet been revealed. The details remained hidden. The destination remained unseen. Yet the promise already existed, and promises have a way of changing the weight of responsibility. A man carrying only his own future carries one burden. A man carrying the future of generations carries another. The burden becomes heavier because the consequences become larger. The responsibility extends beyond the present moment. The steward is no longer preserving only for himself. He is preserving for those who come after him. This principle appears throughout Scripture. Noah preserved more than a family. Abraham carried more than a personal calling. Moses preserved more than a nation. Each steward was carrying something larger than himself, something connected to the future, something connected to preservation, something connected to a promise. And throughout Scripture, another pattern appears as well. The things most connected to the future often become the things most opposed in the present. The things most connected to preservation often become the things most fiercely targeted. The adversary rarely wastes energy attacking what has no significance. The greatest resistance often surrounds the greatest purpose. The greatest pressure is often applied to what possesses the greatest future value. This pattern existed long before Judah, before kings, before kingdoms, before Israel became a nation. Again and again, Scripture records attempts to interrupt what the Most High was preserving, to corrupt it, to redirect it, to stop it from reaching its destination. Judah did not create that conflict. Judah inherited it. This helps explain why responsibility often feels heavier than authority. Authority is visible. Responsibility is often invisible. People see the position. They rarely see the weight. People see the title. They rarely see the burden. People see the recognition. They rarely see the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the vigilance, and the cost required to preserve what has been entrusted. The steward carries weight that others do not fully understand. The steward protects things others may not yet recognize as important. The steward often sacrifices for outcomes that may not appear for generations. This was part of Judah's burden, the burden of preserving what had been entrusted, the burden of protecting what had been handed down, the burden of remaining faithful when the full purpose was not yet visible. This is one of the reasons stewardship can feel lonely. The steward often sees further than those around him. He must continue building before others understand the need. He must continue preserving before others recognize the value. He must continue carrying before others understand why the burden matters. And because the purpose is not always immediately visible, the burden can feel especially heavy. Yet, that is often how the Most High works. The full picture is rarely revealed at the beginning. The steward is asked to be faithful before the outcome is clear, to obey before every answer is given, to preserve before every reason is understood. Judah inherited that responsibility. a responsibility connected to a promise, a responsibility connected to the future, a responsibility that would outlive generations. And as history unfolded, something became increasingly clear. What Judah was preserving was not merely valuable. It was being watched. It was being opposed. It was being targeted. Again and again, forces arose that sought to interrupt what was being carried forward. Not because the burden was insignificant, but because it mattered. The burden was heavy because the responsibility was heavy. The responsibility was heavy because what was being preserved mattered. And that raises an important question. If the responsibility was so important, if the promise was so significant, why would anyone seek to destroy it? And why does opposition seem to follow stewardship wherever it appears? Chapter 4. Why the burden was so heavy. By this point, a question naturally emerges. If stewardship is such an honor, why does it often feel so heavy? Why does responsibility often feel heavier than authority? Why do those entrusted with preservation seem to carry burdens that others do not? The answer begins with understanding the nature of stewardship itself. Not every responsibility carries the same weight. A man responsible only for himself carries one burden. A husband carries another. A father carries another. An elder carries another. A shepherd carries another. A king carries another. The greater the responsibility, the greater the consequences of failure. This is why Scripture consistently connects leadership with accountability. The steward is never responsible only for himself. The steward becomes responsible for what has been entrusted to him. Families, communities, inheritance, truth, future generations. The burden grows because the circle of responsibility grows. A father cannot think only about today. He must think about tomorrow. An elder cannot think only about himself. He must think about the people looking to him for guidance. A shepherd cannot think only about his own welfare. He must think about the flock. The steward is constantly carrying concerns that extend beyond his own life. This is why many people desire authority but avoid stewardship. Authority appears attractive. Stewardship requires sacrifice. Authority can be enjoyed. Stewardship must be carried. Authority receives recognition. Stewardship often receives criticism. Authority may receive applause. Stewardship frequently receives pressure. People often admire the visible position while overlooking the invisible burden attached to it. Yet the burden is the greater reality. The steward is expected to stand firm when others bend, to preserve when others neglect, to remain faithful when compromise appears easier, to think beyond the present moment, to protect what future generations may depend upon. This was Judah's assignment. Not because Judah was more valuable than the other tribes, not because Judah was more loved than the other tribes, but because Judah was entrusted with a particular responsibility. And responsibility changes everything. Because once something is entrusted to a steward, it immediately becomes vulnerable to attack. This is one of the realities many people fail to recognize. Stewardship does not exist in a vacuum. The moment something worth preserving appears, something eventually seeks to corrupt it. The moment truth is established, deception begins looking for entry. The moment order is established, disorder begins pressing against it. The moment covenant is preserved, compromise begins searching for a way in. This pattern appears throughout Scripture. The garden is established. The serpent appears. Noah preserves righteousness. Corruption spreads throughout the earth. Israel is called. Nations rise against it. The pattern repeats because preservation always creates opposition. Anything valuable eventually becomes a target. Anything worth protecting eventually attracts those who would corrupt it. Anything connected to the future eventually encounters resistance in the present. This helps us understand something important about Judah's burden. The burden was not heavy merely because Judah was preserving something. The burden was heavy because Judah was preserving something, while opposition constantly sought to destroy it. The steward was never simply carrying responsibility. The steward was carrying responsibility under pressure. The shepherd was protecting the flock, while predators searched for weakness. The watchman was guarding the city while enemies searched for entry. The protector was preserving order while disorder looked for a foothold. This is why stewardship often feels exhausting. Not because preservation lacks value, but because preservation requires vigilance. What is preserved today must often be preserved again tomorrow. The work is rarely finished. The responsibility rarely disappears. The burden remains, because the threat remains. And over time, another reality becomes clear. The opposition does not always arrive through force. Sometimes it arrives through influence. Sometimes it arrives through temptation. Sometimes it arrives through compromise. Sometimes it arrives through a gate left unguarded. Because those who seek to corrupt preservation eventually learn something important. The strongest walls are not always the easiest way inside. And that is where Babylon becomes one of the most effective adversaries in Scripture. Babylon learned that the easiest way to defeat a people was not always to conquer them. Sometimes it was simply to understand them, to study them, to identify their vulnerabilities, to find the gate. And once the gate was found, the battle was often already half won. The burden was heavy because preservation mattered. And what matters eventually becomes a target. Chapter 5. Babylon studies its enemies. Most people imagine conflict beginning on a battlefield. They imagine armies gathering, weapons being drawn, lines being formed, trumpets sounding, the clash of two opposing forces meeting in open confrontation. Scripture often presents a different reality. Many battles are decided long before armies arrive. Many victories are won long before a single sword is drawn. Many defeats occur long before people realize they are under attack. The greatest empires in history did not merely conquer. They studied, they observed, they learned. They identified strengths. They identified weaknesses. Then they built strategies around what they discovered. Babylon became one of history's greatest examples of this principle. Babylon did not simply seek to overpower people. Babylon sought to understand people, to understand their strengths, to understand their fears, to understand their desires, to understand their ambitions, to understand their vulnerabilities. Because direct confrontation is expensive, corruption is efficient, military conquest requires armies, compromise requires only access. An army can force submission. Influence can make submission voluntary. A conqueror can seize a nation. A corrupter can persuade a nation to surrender itself. Babylon understood this difference, and Babylon repeatedly used it. This is one reason the scriptures devote so much attention to Babylon. Babylon was not merely a geographical location. Babylon became a pattern, a system, a way of operating, a philosophy of control. Babylon understood that if you wish to change a people, you do not always attack them where they are strongest. You study them. You learn them. You identify what they love. You identify what they fear. You identify what they desire. Then you use those things as pathways of influence. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout Scripture. The adversary rarely attacks where resistance is strongest. The adversary searches for openings, for vulnerabilities, for gates, for places where surrender can occur without a fight. This is one reason preservation is so difficult. The steward is not merely protecting against visible threats. The steward is protecting against hidden threats. The steward is not merely watching the horizon. The steward is also watching the gates. Because history repeatedly demonstrates that nations rarely fall first from external pressure. They fall from internal compromise. A city whose walls are breached may survive. A people whose convictions are breached often do not. The attack that destroys a people is often not the attack they anticipated. It is the attack they welcomed. It is the attack they tolerated. It is the attack they normalized. It is the attack they failed to recognize. By the time the consequences become visible, the corruption has often been operating for years, sometimes generations. This is why vigilance is such an important kingdom principle. The steward cannot simply react. The steward must discern. The watchman cannot merely look for armies. The watchman must recognize influence. The shepherd cannot merely defend against wolves. The shepherd must recognize threats disguised as sheep. This is one reason preservation requires wisdom. Not every danger announces itself. Not every threat appears threatening. Not every attack arrives carrying a sword. Some arrive carrying opportunity. Some arrive carrying comfort. Some arrive carrying prosperity. Some arrive carrying acceptance. Some arrive carrying pleasure. The most dangerous attacks are often the attacks that appear beneficial at first. Babylon understood this principle well. And over time, Babylon learned something that remains true to this day. Every people possesses gates. Every nation, every family, every community, every leader, every steward, every generation. The question was never whether a gate existed. The question was whether the gate would be guarded. Because once a gate is identified, the strategy becomes clear. The wall no longer matters. The strength no longer matters. The size of the army no longer matters. Access becomes the objective. And once access is gained, compromise can begin. This is why Babylon rarely starts with destruction. Babylon starts with understanding. Babylon studies. Babylon observes. Babylon learns. Babylon identifies the gate. And once the gate is found, the next phase of the strategy begins. The question becomes, what weakness creates access? What desire opens the door? What vulnerability allows influence to enter? Because every steward has strengths, but every steward also has gates. And history repeatedly shows that Babylon studies both. Chapter 6. The Gate Babylon Studies. One of the remarkable qualities of Scripture is its honesty. Scripture does not function like propaganda. It does not sanitize its heroes. It does not hide their failures. It does not erase their weaknesses. The Most High could have given us a record filled only with victories. Instead, He gave us a record filled with lessons. Scripture records triumphs. Scripture records failures. Scripture records obedience. Scripture records compromise. Scripture records strengths. Scripture records weaknesses. Not to shame those who came before us, but so those who come after them might learn. One of those lessons appears in the account of Judah and Tamar. Many readers approach the account and focus on the scandal. They focus on the controversy. They focus on the uncomfortable details. Yet the deeper lesson concerns something far more important. The access. The account reveals a principle that would echo throughout Israel's history, a principle Babylon would eventually understand very well. People often defend their strengths. They often leave their weaknesses exposed. A fortress rarely falls through its strongest wall. It falls through an unguarded gate. Judah possessed many strengths: leadership, responsibility, courage, influence, stewardship. These qualities would eventually become associated with the tribe itself. Yet Scripture records a vulnerability alongside those strengths: desire, lust, a weakness for the pleasures of women. And Scripture records it for a reason, because unchecked desire frequently creates openings that wisdom would never permit. The issue is not desire itself. The issue is desire that escapes governance and becomes an idol. Desire that operates without restraint. Desire that overrides discernment. Desire that speaks louder than responsibility. This is where many people misunderstand spiritual warfare. They imagine every battle taking place on a battlefield. Many battles take place in the heart. Many battles take place in private decisions. Many battles take place long before any visible consequences appear. A person can possess strength in 10 areas and still be defeated through one unguarded gate. History repeatedly demonstrates this principle. Entire nations have fallen through the same gate. Entire kingdoms have fallen through the same gate. Entire civilizations have fallen through the same gate. Not because armies defeated them, because desire opened doors, because appetite overcame discipline, because impulse overcame wisdom, because temptation gained access where force could not. This is precisely why Babylon studies its enemies. Babylon understands that strength alone is not enough. The strongest wall in a city matters very little if a gate remains open. The largest army matters very little if corruption enters from within. The greatest inheritance matters very little if those entrusted to preserve it become vulnerable to compromise. The enemy understands this. Babylon understands this. The battle is often won before the confrontation begins. The gate opens first. Then influence enters. Then compromise follows. Then the consequences appear. By the time most people recognize the problem, the process has already been underway for years, sometimes for generations. This is why preservation requires more than strength. It requires vigilance. Strength protects against obvious threats. Vigilance protects against hidden ones. Strength guards the wall. Vigilance guards the gate. The steward must learn to protect both, because not every attack announces itself. Not every threat appears threatening. Not every danger arrives looking dangerous. Many arrive looking desirable. Many arrive looking pleasurable. Many arrive looking beneficial. Many arrive looking harmless. That is what makes them effective. Babylon rarely begins by demanding surrender. Babylon begins by offering access. Babylon begins by offering comfort. Babylon begins by offering indulgence. Babylon begins by offering opportunities that appear disconnected from consequences. This pattern repeats throughout Scripture. The enemy offers before he takes. The enemy seduces before he enslaves. The enemy gains access before he gains control. And this is why the account of Judah and Tamar is so important to our discussion. The story is not merely revealing a weakness in one man. It is revealing a principle that applies to tribes, to nations, to leaders, to families, to communities, to every steward entrusted with preservation. The gate Babylon studies is rarely the gate we expect. It is usually the gate we ignore. It is usually the vulnerability we excuse, the appetite we justify, the compromise we minimize, the weakness we assume will never become a problem. Yet history repeatedly demonstrates that what remains unguarded eventually becomes accessible. And once access is gained, the strategy changes. The attack no longer comes from outside. It begins operating from within. This is why compromise is so dangerous. Because by the time compromise becomes visible, influence has already entered the gate. And nowhere in Israel's history do we see this strategy more clearly than in the account of Jezebel. She did not arrive with an army. She arrived with access. Chapter 7. Jezebel's strategy. Few figures in Scripture illustrate Babylon's methods more clearly than Jezebel. What makes her account remarkable is not how she arrived. It is how little resistance her arrival initially created. Most people expect destruction to announce itself. They expect danger to appear dangerous. They expect corruption to arrive openly declaring its intentions. Scripture often reveals a different reality. The most effective forms of corruption rarely introduce themselves as corruption. They arrive as opportunity. They arrive as alliance. They arrive as advantage. They arrive as something beneficial. Jezebel did not arrive leading an army. She did not arrive through invasion. She did not arrive through conquest. She arrived through relationship, through alliance, through influence, through access, and that distinction is critical. Because what force often struggles to accomplish, influence can accomplish quietly. An army can conquer territory. Influence can conquer culture. An army can occupy cities. Influence can occupy minds. An army can control behavior. Influence can reshape values. Babylon understands this principle well. If force is unnecessary, do not use force. If influence can accomplish the objective, influence becomes the weapon. This is one of the oldest strategies in history. The strongest fortress is not always attacked from the outside. Sometimes the gate is opened from within. This is why Jezebel's account deserves careful attention. She was not merely a queen. She became a case study in how corruption spreads. Notice what happened. The throne remained. The government remained. The institutions remained. The people remained. The markets remained. The cities remained. From the outside, everything appeared normal. Yet something fundamental had changed. The spirit guiding the nation shifted. The source of influence shifted. The priority shifted. The direction shifted. The people were looking at the same structures while operating under a different spirit. And this is often how compromise works. It rarely announces itself. It normalizes itself. Compromise enters gradually. What once seemed unacceptable becomes tolerated. What is tolerated becomes accepted. What is accepted becomes protected. What is protected eventually becomes celebrated. And once that process begins, reversing it becomes increasingly difficult. This is why Scripture repeatedly warns against small compromises. Because large departures from truth rarely begin as large departures. They begin as small concessions. One accommodation at a time. One rationalization at a time. One exception at a time. One compromise at a time. Over time, the accumulation becomes transformation. The people may still believe they are preserving the covenant. Yet the covenant itself has begun to erode. The institutions may remain standing. Yet the principles that once sustained them have begun to disappear. This is the danger of infiltration. The change often becomes visible only after it has already occurred. Jezebel therefore represents something larger than a single historical figure. She represents a strategy. The strategy of gaining influence over preservation. The strategy of redirecting stewardship away from covenant responsibility. The strategy of weakening a people without ever fighting them directly. The strategy of transforming a culture while leaving the appearance of normality intact. This is why Babylon so often prefers influence to conquest. Conquest creates resistance. Influence creates participation. Conquest forces submission. Influence persuades people to surrender voluntarily. And once influence gains access, the work becomes easier. The gate has already been opened. The influence has already entered. The compromise has already taken root. This is precisely what makes Jezebel's account so important within the burden of Judah. The steward is not merely responsible for protecting against visible enemies. The steward is responsible for recognizing subtle corruption. The steward must discern when influence is beginning to redirect preservation itself, because not every attack arrives carrying a sword. Some arrive carrying a proposal. Some arrive carrying an alliance. Some arrive carrying comfort. Some arrive carrying acceptance. Some arrive carrying relationships. And if the steward lacks discernment, the gate may be opened before anyone recognizes the danger. Yet the consequences of Jezebel's strategy would not end with her generation. Influence rarely remains contained. Compromise rarely remains isolated. Corruption rarely remains satisfied. What enters through one generation often seeks control of the next. The gate had been opened, the influence had entered, the compromise had taken root, and what began as infiltration would eventually become an attack on preservation itself. Because the final objective was never merely influence. The final objective was continuity. The final objective was inheritance. The final objective was the future. And that future would come under direct attack in the next generation through one of the most aggressive assaults on preservation recorded in Scripture. Chapter 8. Athaliah and the attack on preservation. If Jezebel represents infiltration, Athaliah represents escalation. The strategy that entered through influence eventually advanced into something more dangerous. The attack was no longer merely against policy, no longer merely against worship, no longer merely against culture, no longer merely against the direction of a nation. The attack moved toward preservation itself. This is what makes Athaliah's account so significant. Many people read her story as a struggle for political power, a queen seeking a throne, a ruler seeking control, a dynasty fighting for dominance. Scripture reveals something deeper. Athaliah attempted to eliminate continuity. She attempted to eliminate succession. She attempted to eliminate inheritance. She attempted to erase the future. She attempted to end preservation itself. Notice how the strategy progresses. Jezebel entered through influence. Athaliah moved toward eradication. One corrupted preservation. The other sought to terminate it. This is often how compromise works. What begins as infiltration eventually seeks permanence. What begins as influence eventually seeks control. What begins as accommodation eventually seeks replacement. The objective is never merely to redirect a people. The objective is to prevent recovery, to make restoration impossible, to ensure there is nothing left to restore. This is why the burden of stewardship is so heavy. The steward is never merely protecting the present. The steward is protecting what comes next. The steward stands between inheritance and destruction, between continuity and interruption, between remembrance and forgetting, between preservation and loss. This is why stewardship often requires people to defend things whose importance may not become visible until years later. sometimes generations later. The steward must protect the future before the future arrives. Athaliah understood something many people overlook. If preservation can be interrupted, restoration becomes increasingly difficult. If continuity can be broken, future generations inherit confusion. If inheritance can be severed, identity becomes vulnerable. If memory can be erased, direction becomes uncertain. The attack therefore moved beyond influence. The attack moved beyond compromise. The attack moved toward eradication, toward removing the possibility of continuity itself, toward removing the possibility of restoration itself. This is the difference between corruption and destruction. Corruption seeks to weaken what exists. Destruction seeks to ensure nothing remains. And yet something remarkable happened. The line survived. Not because the threat was small, not because the attack was weak, not because the danger was exaggerated. The threat was real. The attack was deliberate. The objective was clear. Yet preservation itself was preserved. One child survived. One heir remained. One thread continued. History often turns on moments like these. Moments most people never notice. Moments hidden beneath the larger events of history. Moments where preservation hangs by a thread. Moments where inheritance appears one generation away from disappearing. Moments where the future seems dangerously fragile. Yet, Athaliah was not the first attack against preservation, and she would not be the last. Throughout Israel's history, the same pattern appears repeatedly. The steward becomes the target. The household becomes the target. The inheritance becomes the target. The line of continuity becomes the target. Again and again, the attack moves toward those carrying responsibility. Sometimes through open opposition, sometimes through compromise, sometimes through influence, sometimes through relationships, sometimes through the corruption of the steward himself. The objective remains remarkably consistent: interrupt continuity, corrupt succession, weaken preservation, make war upon the scepter itself. This pattern appears throughout the kingdom narrative. Solomon's wives gradually turned his heart away from covenant alignment. The steward became vulnerable. The kingdom became vulnerable. The future became vulnerable. The consequences would eventually reach the next generation. Again and again, Scripture reveals the same reality. The burden of Judah was never merely carrying authority. The burden was carrying authority while under constant pressure. The burden was preserving continuity while forces continually sought to interrupt it. The burden was protecting inheritance while compromise searched for entry. Yet Scripture repeatedly reveals another principle. The Most High often preserves through remnants, not through abundance, not through overwhelming numbers, through continuity, through preservation, through someone remaining faithful when faithfulness appears costly. One steward, one witness, one remnant, one person willing to carry what others have abandoned. This is why the burden of stewardship should never be underestimated. The steward often feels invisible. The steward rarely receives recognition equal to the weight being carried. The steward may never fully see the future being protected. Yet entire futures often depend upon those willing to preserve what others overlook. Entire generations may benefit from sacrifices they never witness. Entire inheritances may survive because someone refused to abandon their responsibility. This is the hidden work of preservation, and it reveals something important about the burden of Judah. The burden was never merely carrying authority. The burden was preserving continuity, preserving inheritance, preserving the future. And as Israel's history continued, that burden would become even heavier. Because preserving truth inside your own nation is one challenge. Preserving truth while surrounded by Babylon is another entirely. And that is exactly the challenge Israel would soon face. Chapter 9. The Scattering of the Steward. One of the great assumptions people make about preservation is that the greatest threat is destruction. At first glance, that seems reasonable. After all, what could be more dangerous than an enemy determined to destroy what you are trying to protect? Yet, Scripture reveals another threat that is often more difficult: dispersion, scattering, displacement. A people can survive conquest. A people can survive hardship. A people can survive captivity. History is filled with examples of nations enduring incredible suffering and still remaining intact. But a different question emerges when a people are scattered. Can they preserve identity while dispersed? Can they preserve truth while surrounded? Can they preserve covenant order while living inside systems designed to replace it? Can they remember who they are when everything around them encourages them to become something else? This became one of Israel's greatest challenges, though warnings had been given repeatedly. Prophet after prophet called the people to return. Again and again, the Most High extended mercy. Again and again, opportunities for correction were provided. Yet over time, compromise accumulated. Disobedience accumulated. Corruption accumulated. The distance between covenant and culture grew wider. The distance between responsibility and convenience grew wider. The distance between preservation and compromise grew wider. Eventually, judgment arrived. The nation fractured, the people were scattered, the steward was dispersed. The familiar structures disappeared. The familiar environment disappeared. The familiar support systems disappeared. The places that once reinforced identity were gone, and yet something important remained. The responsibility did not disappear. The burden did not disappear. The need for preservation did not disappear. In many ways, the burden became heavier, because preserving covenant order inside a covenant society is one challenge. Preserving covenant order inside a foreign society is another. It is one thing to preserve identity while surrounded by people who share it. It is another to preserve identity while surrounded by people who do not. It is one thing to maintain covenant order inside your own house. It is another to maintain covenant order while living inside systems built upon different values. This is why scattering creates unique pressure. The environment begins exerting influence. The surrounding culture begins exerting influence. Convenience begins exerting influence. Survival begins exerting influence. Comfort begins exerting influence. Over time, the pressure becomes constant, not dramatic, not always obvious, but constant. One compromise here, one accommodation there, one adaptation after another, until eventually many begin to forget what they were originally entrusted to preserve. This is one of Babylon's greatest strengths. Babylon understands patience. Babylon does not always seek immediate surrender. Babylon often seeks gradual assimilation. A people who refuse change may eventually accept comfort. A people who resist conquest may eventually embrace convenience. People who reject force may slowly accommodate influence. Generation after generation, the pressure continues. And over time, many people begin adapting to the environment around them. The steward faces a different challenge. The steward must preserve what matters, even when preservation becomes costly. The steward must remember what others forget. The steward must protect what others abandon. The steward must carry what others lay down. The steward must continue preserving what appears increasingly difficult to preserve. This is why stewardship often feels lonely. The steward is frequently carrying something many people no longer recognize as valuable. The steward sees importance where others see inconvenience. The steward sees inheritance where others see tradition. The steward sees responsibility where others see burden. The steward sees preservation where others see irrelevance. And because of that, the steward often walks a path that few understand. Yet the burden remains, because preservation remains necessary. Truth remains worth preserving. Identity remains worth preserving. Covenant remains worth preserving. Responsibility remains worth preserving. The need for faithful stewards does not disappear simply because the environment becomes hostile. If anything, the need becomes greater. And perhaps nowhere is that reality more visible than in the world we inhabit today. Because while the names of the empires may have changed, the challenge facing the steward remains remarkably familiar. The question is no longer whether preservation matters. The question is whether anyone is still willing to carry it. Chapter 10. The burden today. Many people assume the ancient stories ended when the ancient kingdoms disappeared. They read about Babylon and assume Babylon is gone. They read about Israel and assume those struggles belong only to history. They read about kings, prophets, stewards, and empires and assume those lessons have little to do with modern life. Scripture suggests otherwise. The names may change. The empires may change. The technologies may change. The methods may change. But the fundamental struggle remains remarkably familiar. The battle is still about preservation. The battle is still about stewardship. The battle is still about responsibility. The battle is still about whether truth can survive in a world that constantly pressures people to abandon it. Babylon's methods have evolved. Its objective has not. Babylon still studies weaknesses. Babylon still exploits vulnerabilities. Babylon still searches for gates. Babylon still seeks access through what remains unguarded. Only the battlefield has changed. Ancient Babylon used temples. Modern Babylon uses institutions. Ancient Babylon used idols. Modern Babylon often uses distractions. Ancient Babylon used chains. Modern Babylon frequently uses comfort. Yet the objective remains remarkably familiar. Influence the steward. Redirect preservation. Interrupt inheritance. Replace responsibility with convenience. The strategy has not changed. Only the tools have. Today, the attack often targets family, identity, purpose, responsibility, conviction, discipline, inheritance. Because Babylon understands something many people forget. If preservation fails, compromise expands. If compromise expands, identity weakens. If identity weakens, stewardship disappears. And when stewardship disappears, future generations inherit confusion instead of clarity. This is why responsibility feels heavy. Not because responsibility is a punishment. Because responsibility matters. The burden carried by parents is preservation. Parents preserve values. Parents preserve instruction. Parents preserve identity. Whether they realize it or not, they are handing something to the next generation. The burden carried by elders is preservation. The burden carried by teachers is preservation. The burden carried by shepherds is preservation. The burden carried by communities is preservation. Every generation becomes a steward of something. Every generation inherits something. Every generation passes something forward. The question is never whether we are preserving something. The question is what we are preserving, and whether what we preserve is worthy of being handed to those who come after us. This is why the issue is larger than information. Information alone can be stored. Information alone can be archived. Information alone can be recovered. Preservation goes deeper than information. Preservation involves truth, character, order, faithfulness, responsibility, conviction. These things cannot simply be stored. They must be lived. They must be demonstrated. They must be carried. This is why every generation faces the same challenge. What has been entrusted to us? And are we preserving it? Not merely repeating it, not merely talking about it, not merely remembering it, preserving it, protecting it, living it, carrying it forward. The challenge facing the modern steward is not fundamentally different from the challenge facing the ancient steward. The pressure may look different. The tools may look different. The environment may look different. But the burden feels remarkably familiar. The steward still faces compromise. The steward still faces pressure. The steward still faces convenience. The steward still faces influence. The steward still faces the temptation to lay down what has been entrusted. Yet the central question remains unchanged. Will we preserve what has been entrusted to us, or will we surrender it for convenience? Will we carry the burden, or will we leave it for someone else? Will we remain faithful, or will we adapt until nothing remains worth preserving? That question sits at the center of every generation. It sits at the center of every family. It sits at the center of every community. It sits at the center of every steward. And ultimately, it sits at the center of this message because the burden of Judah was never ultimately about Judah. It was about stewardship. It was about preservation. It was about responsibility. It was about the willingness to carry what others might abandon. It was about remaining faithful when compromise appeared easier. It was about protecting what mattered when the world around you no longer recognized its value. That is why Judah's story still matters. Not because we are studying an ancient tribe, because we are studying an eternal principle. Someone must preserve what is worth preserving. Someone must carry the burden. Someone must remain faithful. Someone must stand watch. Someone must protect the inheritance. Someone must go first. And that question remains before every generation. The burden remains. The responsibility remains. The need for stewardship remains. The question remains, who will preserve what has been entrusted to them? Final chapter. The ministry is the walk. As we come to the end of this discussion, it becomes clear that the burden of Judah was never primarily about authority. It was never primarily about crowns. It was never primarily about position. Those are the things people often notice. Those are the things history tends to record. Those are the things the world tends to celebrate. Yet Scripture repeatedly points us somewhere deeper. The burden of Judah was preservation. The burden of Judah was stewardship. The burden of Judah was responsibility. Judah was entrusted with carrying something that had to survive, something that had to be protected, something that had to be preserved from one generation to the next, something that would remain valuable even when the people entrusted to protect it no longer fully understood its value. This is why the burden remained heavy, not because the steward was weak, because the responsibility was important. The steward was expected to stand when others sat down, to remain faithful when others compromised, to preserve when others neglected, to remember when others forgot, to carry when others laid the burden down. This is one of the most misunderstood principles in Scripture. Many people desire authority. Far fewer desire responsibility. Many people desire recognition. Far fewer desire stewardship. Many people want influence. Far fewer want accountability. Many people want the crown. Far fewer want the burden that comes before it. Yet the kingdom pattern never changes. The shepherd serves before he leads. The steward carries before he governs. The watchman watches before he warns. The protector sacrifices before he receives honor. The burden comes before the crown. It always has. We see it in Noah. We see it in Abraham. We see it in Moses. We see it in David. We see it throughout the prophets. And we see it in Judah. The steward carries first. The reward, if it comes at all, comes later. Because the kingdom has never been built upon privilege. The kingdom is built upon responsibility. Throughout this message, we have seen the same pattern repeated. The burden was entrusted. The burden became opposed. Babylon studied the steward. Babylon studied the gate. Babylon learned how compromise enters. Babylon learned how preservation can be weakened. Babylon learned that influence often succeeds where force fails. Babylon learned that corruption often succeeds where conquest fails. Babylon learned that the easiest way to destroy the future is often to weaken the people responsible for preserving it. Yet despite the pressure, the responsibility remained. The burden remained. The need for preservation remained. Generation after generation faced the same choice. Will we carry what has been entrusted to us, or will we lay it down? Will we preserve what matters, or will we surrender it for convenience? Will we remain faithful, or will we allow compromise to slowly replace conviction? This is not merely an ancient question. It is a modern question. It is a family question. It is a community question. It is a generational question. And ultimately, it is a personal question. Every person listening to this message has been entrusted with something. Some have been entrusted with families, some with knowledge, some with wisdom, some with influence, some with resources, some with responsibility for others. Some have been entrusted with truth. The question is never merely what has been entrusted. The question is whether we will preserve it. Because stewardship is ultimately revealed through preservation, anyone can claim responsibility. The steward proves responsibility through what remains intact after the pressure arrives. Perhaps that is why the opening question still echoes across the centuries. Who shall go up first? Who will step forward? Who will carry responsibility? Who will preserve what matters? Who will accept the burden when the burden becomes heavy? Who will remain faithful when compromise becomes easier? Who will stand watch when others become distracted? Who will remember when others forget? The answer was Judah. Not because Judah was promised comfort. Not because Judah was promised ease. Not because Judah was promised privilege. Judah was called because Judah was willing to carry responsibility. Judah was willing to preserve. Judah was willing to go first. And that remains one of the defining characteristics of stewardship today. The steward goes first. The servant goes first. The protector goes first. The burden goes first. And in the kingdom of the Most High, it has always been that way. Closing exhortation. The purpose of this message was never simply to study an ancient tribe. The purpose was to understand a kingdom principle. Responsibility always weighs more than authority. Preservation always costs more than possession. Stewardship always requires sacrifice. What is valuable rarely survives by accident. It survives because someone intentionally preserves it. Someone teaches it. Someone protects it. Someone carries it. Someone refuses to abandon it. The burden of Judah is not ultimately a lesson about Judah. It is a lesson about everyone who has been entrusted with something worth preserving. Truth must be preserved. Families must be preserved. Character must be preserved. Instruction must be preserved. Covenant must be preserved. Inheritance must be preserved. responsibility must be preserved. The question is not whether the burden exists. The question is whether someone is willing to carry it, because preservation always requires someone willing to bear the weight. And when preservation disappears, compromise takes its place. Transition to Episode 3, The Cost of Compromise. Yet stewardship faces a danger. Not every burden is carried. Not every responsibility is protected. Not every gate remains guarded. Throughout this message, we have examined how Babylon studies weakness, how Babylon studies the steward, how infiltration succeeds where conquest often fails, how compromise enters long before collapse becomes visible. The next question naturally follows. What happens when the gate is left open? What happens when preservation gives way to convenience? What happens when compromise becomes acceptable? Because kingdoms rarely collapse overnight. Families rarely collapse overnight. Communities rarely collapse overnight. People rarely collapse overnight. Compromise begins small, then it spreads. Then it becomes normal. Then it becomes culture. And this is exactly what happened within Israel. The next chapter of the story is not primarily about stewardship. It is about what happens when stewardship fails. Not because of armies, not because of invasion, not because of conquest, but because compromise enters through the gate. Because what was once resisted becomes tolerated. What was tolerated becomes accepted. What was accepted becomes protected. And what was protected eventually becomes part of the culture itself. The cost is rarely visible at first, but eventually the bill comes due. And that brings us to our next message, the cost of compromise. Because preservation is difficult, but restoring what compromise destroys is often even harder. May our Father's peace be with you. Remember, our Father blesses motion and obedience to His word. Get it in you. Live it. Shalom.